Hadrien emerges from fugue and awakens on a bed, somewhere on the world of Pharos. He is on the ship Pharaoh, acquired by his crew after they overthrew the dictator Marius Went. Their search for the fabled world of Vargasos has taken nearly 5 decades, during which they have posed as a mercenary outfit called the Red Company. Hadrien visits Commodore Basander Lin, and they discuss their current target. They are searching for someone called the Painted Man, and have found one of his associates named Samir. Captain Octavia Corvo has sent down a lieutenant named Krim to set up a meeting with Samir, in the hopes the lead to Vargasos can be found. Basander distrusts Corvo and her gang, as well as Hadrian's Myrmidon friends, believing they will only be loyal so long as they are paid. They are operating under the name of the Majua Red Company, with Corvo commanding the ship Mistral. Basander is slowly coming to see their mission, however, as a waste of time. In the decades they have spent searching for Vargasos, the Seielson have destroyed 13 more colonies of the Empire, representing millions of lives lost. Red Company is part of the small fleet of 3 ships on the expedition, the Mistral, Pharaoh, and Balmung, where the Seielson prisoners are kept. Hadrien, remembering Lin's gripes, begins to also doubt they are on the right course. Their fleet hovers above Rustam, awaiting word from Octavia's man on the surface. Hadrien stands by the side of the Jadian captain Gina Nazar, commanding officer of the Jadian contingent of the expedition, and his lover. Word is finally sent, and Hadrien takes a shuttle down to the surface of Rustam with Switch and 2 other soldiers to find Samir. One of them is a dryad homunculus named Elex, who pilots them down to the haphazard, tangled cityscape. They head out to meet Krim at the starship Murakami, Switch disturbed by the unsettling city. He makes the holy gesture of the sun disk as Krim makes the rendezvous with Hadrien. He gives him a rose-flowered candy, and takes them to Samir. There, Krim and Hadrien talk with the arms dealer about procuring atomic weapons from the Painted Man. Samir knows vaguely of Hadrian's imperial background, and agrees to take them to his master. They are escorted to a tea house filled with customers who seem to pay them no mind. And there, Hadrien finally meets the notorious Painted Man. Inhumane. Inhuman. Its was the face of ancient terror, of the predator in love with the hunt. And worse yet, it knew what it was, for it had painted itself to heighten the terror it engendered. The lips were red, like a clown's parody of a Jadian Cortegiano, and when it smiled, it revealed far, far too many teeth. Hadrien begins discussing business with the Painted Man, hiding his unease. He asks for information on Vargasos, but the Painted Man refuses to help. It only reveals the world is controlled by someone called the Undying, and must be shown rather than found, as it is a world with no sun. As negotiations break down, a sniper shot rings out and takes out one of the Painted Man's thugs. Gen arrives with a squad of soldiers, and battle breaks out. Hadrien draws his shimmering high matter sword and orders the Painted Man to stand down. However, it dances away and taps its head. And around Red Company, the patrons of the tea house suddenly go silent. Hadrien now sees their glassy eyes, hollow and void of true life. Then as a mob, they suddenly surge forwards. Hadrien cuts one down, and then sees metal in its body, wires and tubing spilling out as it falls. The diners are daemons, otherworldly tools and weapons of the Painted Man. Hadrien orders Gen to pursue the Painted Man, who had fled towards some stairs. His team desperately fights off the daemons, with some soldiers battling Legion style, back to back in groups of 3. Hadrien is nearly overcome by the daemons, but is saved at the last moment by a smiling Gen. Hadrien hails a shuttle for evacuation, and moves with Gen towards the stairs to chase down the Painted Man. Gen is sent down to check their escape route as Hadrien fights off another wave of daemons. The company conducts a fighting retreat down the stairs, but they nearly trip over several bodies. It is Gen and his men, with Hadrian's friend dead with a plasma burner hole in his back. The Painted Man emerges and stuns Hadrien, taking him captive. He comes to his senses later in an office of sorts with the Painted Man, who plans to hold him for ransom. It laments the destruction of its daemons, referred to as SOMs. The Painted Man gloats at Gen's death, and with its unnatural powers literally transforms into a physical replica of Hadrian's comrade. Hadrien, seething, again asks for information on Vargasos. The painted man laughs, believing Hadrien seeks the key to immortality or other biological alterations that can be found there. Hadrien then takes a small meteorite and hurls it at the homunculus as the floor rocks beneath them. He realizes they are in a cable car of sorts as the painted man falls, tangled in wires and holding its face. Hadrien takes a munitions chest and smashes the painted man's face in, killing it. He takes back Aloran's sword and his shield belt, and retrieves a small terminal disc from the ruined head as well as the painted man's stunner. Opening the door and finding himself suspended in the air, Hadrien leaps out and begins looking for a way to contact his fleet. He recalls an aphorism of Gibson, taught to him when he was young. Grief is deep water. No one can swim. The rightly tuned mind does not deny its emotions, but floats with them. It accepts what it feels and so incorporates that feeling to itself. Thus the mind is not subject, but rules itself. Hadrien is able to get into contact with Jeannin, and later that night is found by her in a cafe. They head back to their ship arm in arm, Hadrien coping with Gen's death and the horrors of the Painted Man. I can point to but few moments that are as shining and simple as that warm and gentle quiet we shared. But the ugliness of the world does not fade, and fear and grief are not made less by time. We are only made stronger. We can only float together on their tides, before it ends, before it has to end. Basander Lin is furious that no actionable intel was gained from the mission, as not even Samir was secured. He reveals they have received new orders to return to the 437th Legion to rejoin the war effort, where they will fight under 1st Strategos Hotman at Koratani. The powerful Octavia Corvo is hesitant to employ the Mistral in a pitched battle, a sentiment echoed by our second-in-command Bastian Durand. Basander is outraged, his sense of duty demanding he return to the front where countless lives are being lost. Hadrien, however, remains determined that Vargasos is the key to everything, and presents the Painted Man's terminal. Basander argues it should be turned over to the Legion fleet, and Jeannin suddenly speaks up, agreeing with Lin. Hadrien is nearly driven speechless, but manages to convince them to telegraph Rain Smythe first to see what to do. So Red Company waits for days on the Mistral, reminiscing fondly over Gen. Siron, Gen's lover, is taken out of fugue. Hadrien breaks the news to her, and true to her military nature, she takes it in stride after a moment of grieving. Hadrien is suddenly inspired then to contact Rain Smythe himself. He meets again with the expedition's commanding officers, where they learn the Painted Man's terminal has not provided any information on Vargasos. Hadrien asks if the name March Station was mentioned, recalling the Painted Man referencing it. He proposes they search all 17 sites listed on the terminal, a notion Basander vehemently disagrees with. Hadrien asks to be given the Seielson prisoner so he can continue on alone, presumably with Octavia and the Mistral. He firmly believes that Vargasos will yield a way of contacting the Seielson fleet, opening an avenue to peace. However, Basander does not, and never will, see things that way, believing the Seielson to be no more than bloodthirsty animals. Jeannin then strikes the killing blow, saying her soldiers will go to Koratani with Basander. Hadrien is disgusted, and Octavia reasserts her command of the Mistral and refuses to return to the legions. It seems, though, that after the long years of fighting together, Red Company will be broken apart. Hadrien, however, refuses to submit to Lin's orders. Afterwards, he approaches Octavia and asks to hire her to go to March Station, for Hadrien boldly plans to steal the Seielson prisoners from the Balmung and transfer them to the Mistral. Switch, Valka, Krim, and Siron are employed to help carry out the heist. However, on the Balmung they are noticed by Jeannin and Basander, who are carrying out the last transfer procedures. His heart heavy, Hadrien continues on to the Seielson cells. He ends up only being able to free Tanaran from fugue, unable to do anything for the other prisoners. As they sneak towards a lift, however, they are spotted by a technician and are unable to stun them in time. Moving quickly, they race forwards but are stopped by a lieutenant and their squad. Hadrian's team manages to stun them, but an alarm is triggered and their cover is blown. Alara and Polino join them as they race to the escape shuttle. The hull descends into chaos, and Hadrien cuts several grapnels securing the Sparrowhawk fighters, sending them tumbling down. As the fighting rages on, 3 Imperial soldiers are killed at the hands of Hadrien and Red Company. Basander Lin then arrives, drawing his own High Matter sword, He and Hadrien duel in a vicious brawl, and Hadrien is floored by a blow to the nose. Switch then arrives and stuns Basander, whose hand is then cut off by Hadrien. They stagger to the shuttle as Genin arrives, opening fire at Hadrien. He is struck several times, and turns to look at her for the final time. My Genin, my captain. There were tears in her eyes, but no sorrow. The shuttle takes off, and they steal out of the Balmung and towards the haven of the Mistral. Hadrien visits Tanaran to find it speaking with Valka as the ship arrives at March Station. Hadrien lands on the surface in a raining, gloomy city, the realm of the infamous extrasolarians. The press of humanity there is riddled with demonic technological alterations, an experience of unholy terror for Red Company. Searching for a lead, they visit a clinic of sorts, where one can modify their flesh or even their very human essence. Hadrien is disgusted by what he sees, and meets with a small man called Sento. He poses as a palatine seeking immortality on Vargasos, but is told only the exalted of the Undying can permit him onto the planet. Hadrien is put into contact with Mr. Brevin, an alleged traitor with the exalted of Vargasos. The price of marks is incredibly steep, however. Brevin proposes that Hadrien instead relinquish a sample of his palatine blood, but he refuses to sell himself out of pride. Instead, it is agreed that a vial of blood will be taken from Tanaran for genetic research, and to serve as payment for a spot on a ship to Vargasos. After some convincing, Tanaran agrees to the terms. A vial of black Seielson blood is delivered to Brevin, and the Mistral departs from March Station to a rendezvous point in space. The crew is uneasy, not trusting they won't be abducted for nefarious purposes. A banging is then heard outside the ship, and responding quickly, Octavia readies 2 decades of men near the doors. The airlock is opened, and a large robot enters the ship, and introduces itself as their ferry to the exalted ship Enigma of Hours. It requests permission to wire itself into the Mistral's controls, which is done to ensure the privacy of the extrasolarian ship. The crew watches as their ship sails into darkness, powerless to control anything. Then, out of the dark there appears a massive ship, some 100 miles long. It glitters with countless lights and towers, seeming to resemble an entire city by itself. Their guide informs them they will be ordered to remain on their ships until warp. Hadrien and his crew begin to wait for the all-clear. Switch expresses some regret over their actions for choosing to help Tanaran at the expense of the Empire. After several days, they are let off their ships. Hadrien and his friends take in the sights and unnatural creations of humanity, including something resembling a mechanical spider with the head of a man. The streets are littered with SOMs, and Hadrien incidentally becomes separated from the company. He comes across a man with a tall hat and glasses, who claims to know an oracle. Sees the future, sees the past. Took a dip in one of them deeps he did. Nearly killed him, nearly drove him mad. All that time laid bare as hours in the Emperor's harem to his eye. Wells they are, cisterns built by those as came before. The exalted man claims the oracle Jari, who he can show to Hadrien, can see everything. Hadrien agrees to see Jari, who turns out to be a husk of an exalted. He asks the oracle if he can truly see the future. There is no future. Everything already is. They only have to choose. Jari allegedly drank dark water from a deep, from which a strange Xenobite gave him his powers. He stares at Hadrien, then mysteriously declares his river is broken. Hadrien himself has no beginning. A chill runs through him as Jari impersonates several voices from Hadrian's past, things he should have no way of knowing. Leopards. Leopards, lions, and wolves. We are not them. Your past is broken. Light. 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 Hadrien is shaken, and cannot help but recall his vision back on Kalag, for there he had seen a massive ship of darkness, one that plunged into a mysterious light. He leaves the oracle rattled and retreats back to the ship. Hadrien feels terribly alone, and does not tell anyone of his experience with Jari. Eventually, the Enigma of Hours arrives at Vargasos, a dark world orbiting a brown dwarf star. Red Company exits the ship to an empty hold on a tall black spire that will take them down to the surface. They all sense they are being watched somehow, though there are no physical cameras or even mechanical or organic beings present besides themselves. Hadrien leads them down a desolate lift, which they ride for hours. He begins to hear voices, and in a dreamlike state sees white faces and hands emerging from the dark, only uttering Hadrien and listen. The spire takes them underground, and Red Company exits to an otherworldly sight. For a city has been hollowed out entirely under the surface of Vargasos, with domes and chambers of unimaginable heights branching off everywhere. The company descends towards the city, where to their relief they can see men and women moving about. Hadrien searches for clues leading them to the ruler of the world, the Undying. The city is a quiet, drab place, indicative of some hidden force imposing a great sense of order. An old woman calls out to them, asking why they have come. She claims the Undying is well aware of their arrival, and that he sees all. The woman goes on, saying the Undying is immortal and the one who raised the Titanic city and drove the ancient demons out. Hadrien deduces the Undying is Kagara, the king with 10,000 eyes and seemingly a myth come to life. If true, Kagara would be nearly 15,000 years old, a simply mind-boggling number. Hadrien and his company are then surrounded by a ring of faceless men, more SOMs. A golem steps forward, and Hadrien asks to speak with Kagara, stating he has a captive Seielson Baton. All the while, they still have been unable to get through to Corvo and the others back on the Mistral. The golem steps forwards, and then the company is stunned and taken away. Hadrien awakens to find his friends gone, himself reclined on a couch in a room with paintings and tapestries. It turns out he is not in a prison, but instead a glorified waiting room of sorts. With him are many other men and women, all waiting for an audience with Kagara. They can leave at any time, but can only be allowed to see the Undying when his golem Yume is sent. Some have been waiting for weeks on end, even months. Time passes irregularly for Hadrien there, who finds the servers of food only appear at random intervals. However, after much waiting, Hadrien is one day summoned to meet with Kagara. The golem Yume takes him down further, to the surface level of a massive underground sea. They approach a white pyramid, where Hadrien is left alone. And there, inside at the base of a towering pillar, is Kagara. Thus he seems to me in memory, king of the Titans in all his ruinous glory, couched in numb contemplation of the dark. How long he'd been seated in that awful chair I could not imagine, nor imagine the well and depth of years in his experience. Silence echoes in the vast chamber, and suddenly a deep voice seems to boom from a small drone hovering nearby. Hadrien approaches Kagara on his throne, asking to make contact with the Seielson prince Aronata. The Undying listens as Hadrien pleads his case for peace, under the watchful eyes of more countless drones. Wars end. War does not. And I am not much troubled what form our wars take. For over 15,000 years now, your empire has warred across the galaxy. I have watched your sun rise over 500 million worlds. And before that, before me, it was the same, only it was smaller. What is it to me who sits on your solar throne, or how long is its sway? Kagara views the Seielson as a mere storm, one that may buffet Vargasos for a time but will come to pass. He reveals he has traded with many Seielson, including Aronata, Hasurum, and Dorayeka for 500 years. It surpasses the time before first contact, and appalls Hadrien. Do so many deaths mean so little to you? Yes, when you've seen as many lives as I have, you learn how little they are worth. Karn dismisses Hadrien, returning his high matter sword. He welcomes him to stay in the palace, but also asks for Tanaran to be brought before him. Hadrien is at last permitted to return to his friends, who reveal it has been 23 days since they were separated. They cannot believe the legend of Kagara is real, and a disturbed Switch offers to go back to the Mistral to retrieve Tanaran. Valka and the others will accompany him, and Hadrien decides to stay behind to try and speak more with Karn. Switch disagrees with Hadrien staying, not trusting the daemons, but relents and departs in silence. Hadrien settles into his new quarters, and learns from Yume that like before, Kagara will speak again with him only on his own terms. He explores the strangely beautiful grounds, guided by Yume to more lower levels. Hadrien stops before a painting, momentarily transfixed. Kagara then sends a homunculus to Hadrien, which turns out to be an SOM that tests him with sexual temptations. Kagara speaks to Hadrien through the SOM, which he rejects, and leaves him unsettled. That evening, the mysterious voices appear to Hadrien again when he sleeps, simply commanding him to listen. He waits for several days for his friends to deliver Tanaran to Karn, until Valka suddenly arrives at his quarters with a Cielcin. They are promptly escorted to see the Undying again, who is still seated on his archaic throne. Tanaran recounts its imprisonment to Karn. After some deliberation, the Undying then declares he will work to return Tanaran to its master, and to deal with Aronata. He shrewdly advises Tanaran to not trust the humans and the Sullan Empire. Hadrien appeals to Karn to let him remain to speak with the Seielson, invoking their commonalities as humans. Karn then stands from his throne, revealing his technologically altered midsection that cannot be considered natural. He is unnaturally mechanical, but is surprised when Hadrien reveals he defied Imperial commands to come to Vargasos. Karn sits back down and orders Hadrien out, his intentions still ambiguous. Returning to the suite, Hadrien and Valka puzzle over the origins of Vargasos, and come to believe Karn may have built his dominion with the help of an ancient daemon of the Maricani. Hadrien proposes they try and find it in order to free the lockdown on the Mistral so they can escape with Tanaran. After some time, they decide to further explore the labyrinthine grounds. Hadrien and Valka end up descending into an enchanting garden filled with lights that is a striking difference from the blunt brutalism of Vargasos. They continue to travel down, using Valka's Tavrosi technology to find a path. She finds a hidden door as the lights go out. They move down a hallway and into a stone room, where beyond Hadrien finds, inexplicably, a lush meadow with a river. They walk towards a grove of trees, with one taller than the others. Hadrien hears movement and out of the corner of his eye sees two eyes before they vanish. They chase the creature but lose it, instead finding another chamber. Inside are several pillar-like enclosures, all filled with different animals. All this life has been locked away in Vargasos for unknown reasons, in this strange garden of Karn Kagara. They still have no clue where Tanaran is being held, but the voice has suddenly returned to Hadrien, telling him he is close. Hadrien confides to Valka of his recent spells, and then reveals the voices have guided him with flashing visions to a nearby door. There they see many pillars, from which hang glass jars with children. Though all have different physical appearances, Hadrien instantly realizes they are all clones of Karn Kagara, the key to his immortality. He and Valka then hear singing drifting towards them, and as they move towards it, a different booming voice thunders at them. A massive machine suddenly stirs with a single boom arm, another exalted and apparently guardian of the sanctum. Hadrien strikes at the black armor of the exalted, but is shocked when his high matter sword bounces off. Valka opens fire with her plasma burner, and together they battle the beast. It suddenly stops, and bows to a young woman holding a boy by the hand. She calls the exalted father Calvert. Hadrien learns the woman and boy are Suzuha and Ren, both clones of Karn Kagara. He tries to convince them to escape with him to no avail, and asks where to find Tanaran. Calvert reveals that an entity called the Brethren may know Tanaran's location. Hadrien knows the Exalted is referring to a daemon, which he learns is likely further underground. Calvert then leads Hadrien, Valka, and the clones to a deep darkness. They climb some stairs, and Hadrien hears the sound of waves and the voices once more. You have come here, though you do not know why. Hadrien demands to be shown to Karn's computer as Calvert descends to the shore. He convinces Valka to linger behind with the clones, and moves to join Calvert. As he reaches the water's edge, however, Calvert betrays Hadrien and attacks him to protect the clones. A flash of white then rushes out from the water and lifts Calvert in the air. Hadrien swings his sword and finds a weak point in the Exalted's armor. The white phantom is revealed to be a ghastly hand and the end of an unnaturally long arm. It is Brethren, revealed to be the source of the voices. Brethren speaks to Hadrien, who sees countless hands swarming in the dark waters and senses a grasping presence in his mind. He listens as Brethren reveals it has been waiting for him. We are Brethren, a child of Columbia. We, we, we are AI, yes, but are no more artificial than are you yourself, child of clay. We think, and therefore are. Hadrien realizes that Brethren is one of the Mericani, who were vanquished by the first Emperor William long ago. It is revealed Brethren was created in a place called San Francisco as more hands rise from the sea. Time is only another kind of space for those with eyes to see. Your past and futures are part of you, stretch from you. You are broken, broken before, and broken again, where most only break once. They have pruned, tampered with, altered your probability states, to ensure your arrival here, to ensure your arrival there. You must learn now. You must listen now. They need you to listen. Leopards, lions, wolves. They knew. They saw you. Have seen. Foreseen your arrival. Standing here. And left word with the brethren. For you, child. The man to end it all. They told you. Showed you. What will be. What must be. Hadrien is baffled as the hands vanish back into the waters. Pain flashes in his head, and he becomes blind. Darkness washes over him, and another vision strikes him. He sees a cradle, reminiscent of the one he saw in Kalag so long ago. Hadrien reaches inside and pulls out a stark white eggshell. He falls back, and the vision changes to a monstrous figure. It was not quite a Seielson, for it was far more dark and frightening than any of the pale I had seen. 9 feet tall and terrible as death itself. Its armor was of silver. In its fist was a blade of cloud blue high matter, and in its wake came a woman in chains. Without being told, I knew her name was Man, for in her eyes was the pain of all suffering and the wisdom of every age. Behind these two marches the rank and file of a host of monsters vast as empires that raise spears and shouts at the invisible sky, and I knew the smoke behind them rose from 1,000 worlds. The Seielson crowned in silver decapitates a human, who turns out to be Hadrien himself. Speechless, Hadrien watches as a great light erupts from behind him to wipe away the Seielson host. Alone, I turned toward that light, and turning my head to either side, beheld myself in a million aspects. Hadrien sees countless futures of himself, one in which he sits on the solar throne with the red-haired princess at his feet. Visions of his future dance across his eyes, and in many of them he sees Valka. The vision dissipates, and Hadrien hears another voice that seems to be the Quiet themselves. Brethren speaks to him once more, implying the Quiet found them so Hadrien in turn would encounter Brethren and learn everything. We have simulated countless futures. In most of those, what you call the Quiet do not exist. They shout from one corner of time, drawing the present to themselves as the sirens drew brave Ulysses. Thus they create themselves. Brethren warns Hadrien that he is coming, as well as Karn Sagara. Tanaran is revealed to be actually in the palace above ground as Karn himself arrives. Hadrien is detained, with the Brethren compelling him to deactivate his sword. Karn moves to kill Hadrien, but is stopped by Brethren, which asserts Hadrien is necessary for Vargasos to survive. He and Valka are led away, with Brethren speaking one last time to Hadrien. The price of life is death. With what will you pay, half-mortal? Hadrien and Valka are led to a concrete compound by the seawall. It is of ancient origins, possibly once belonging to the Mericani. Hadrien learns from Valka of the existence of the deeps, some form of microorganism present on worlds that also bear signs of the Quiet. It was the deeps that gained the Oracle Jari his strange powers. Exploring their quarters, Valka then finds the same white stone Hadrien saw in his vision. He knows the Quiet bade him the fight, but frustratingly does not comprehend for what cause. Hadrien and Valka are imprisoned for days, and a mocking Father Calvert comes to visit them. Hadrien strikes Calvert, who lands a devastating blow to Hadrien's face. Calvert takes samples of Hadrien and Valka's blood, then knocks Hadrien out and departs. He awakens with a serious concussion and new scars littering his left arm. More days pass, and as he recovers, he speaks with Valka more about his changing perspectives. Hadrien wonders what purpose he has been ordained for, and they spend long hours talking together. However, one day Yume appears, signaling Karn Kagara wishes to see them again at last. Brethren speaks to Hadrien again, imploring him to protect the clones. They foretell he will have need of one of them in the future, and reaffirm his importance to the Quiet. They need you. Why? You know, we beckon them. Their future, we must. Seek them at the highest place, at the bottom of the world. Seek hardship. Hadrien and Valka are brought again before the Undying, who informs them events have changed. Distant doors open, and none other than Basander Lin and a double column of legionnaires enter the halls. Karn reveals he did not summon the Empire to Vargasos, and it seems that Rain Smythe is also en route on the ship Obdurate. Hadrien realizes the Seielson are also coming, as he and Valka are detained by Lin's men. They fly out to rendezvous with Smythe, who Hadrien knows risked her life to allow him to seek Vargasos. His thoughts turn to who betrayed him and summoned Basander Lin. He reunites with the Cold Genin, who then informs him the fleet was hailed by Switch. She departs, and Lin arrives at Hadrien's cell. He looks to punish Hadrien for violating the proper chain of command, and for killing 3 of his men during his escapade so long ago. Hadrien learns Switch had sold them out of fear of the Chantry, owing to their close experiences with daemons. Corvo and the others on the Mistral are unharmed, but may be subject to an inquisition. Surprisingly, Basander then allows Hadrien to return to the Mistral and his friends. There, Hadrien finally reunites with Polino, Krim, Ilex, and Octavia. His friends had feared him dead, and Hadrien confides that the meetup with the Seielson may be a trap. However, they are powerless to do anything, for their ship is docked within Karn Kagara's monstrous vessel Demiurge. Hadrien begins retraining his body, and during one session, Switch arrives and confronts him. Hadrien refuses to forgive him for risking the lives of the entire company. Switch insists he acted out of only fear, an attempt to save everyone from what he perceived as doom. Hadrien dismisses Switch, ordering him off the ship. Their journey comes to an end, and an Imperial shuttle docks in the landing bay. Dame Rain Smythe strides out with her first officer, Sir William Crossflame. Karn Kagara is not present for the meeting, but Hadrien knows the Undying is still closely monitoring every affair. Smythe approaches Hadrien, informing him he will help as a translator alongside one serving under Strategos Hauptmann. The Imperial contingent meets with Karn in the holds of the Demiurge. The Undying will serve as a mediator of sorts for the negotiations, and is flanked by Ren and Suzuha. The Seielson prisoners are brought out of Fugue, and Hadrien learns 5 Imperial freighters will be bringing some sort of cargo to the talks. Smythe takes Hadrien and her officers to Lin's ship Shiovona to prepare for the talks. Hadrien learns the other translator will be Tor Varo, and that Tanaran has been transported back to the legions. Smythe and Crosslane are confident in their ability to handle Vargasos should Kagara betray them, but Hadrien warns them and Lin to not underestimate his abilities. Smythe dismisses Crosslane and Lin and pulls Hadrien aside. She gives him back his High Matter sword, acquired from Kagara, and tells him Octavia must ready her crew of 300 soldiers on the Mistral. Sometime later, the Imperial party, Hadrien and Kagara meet on an ancillary bridge of the Demiurge. The Seielson have arrived, and a holograph is shown of the massive ship of Kagara in space. Karn then zooms out, and Hadrien is shocked when a world ship resembling a small moon looms in the picture. A Seielson then appears on the holograph, demanding to speak with Karn. The Seielson accepts Karn's terms upon hearing only 800 humans are stationed on the Demiurge, but then the Undying claims they have prepared a gift. Hadrien feels a cold anger seep into him, and listens as Karn tells the Seielson they will be given 20,000 human slaves. Smythe and Crosslane admit the slaves are from the colonial stores in Fugue, people who had been put under until new worlds could be settled for the Empire. After the Seielson sweep the meeting area for traps, the time of the historical summit at last arrives. Hadrien walks at the front of an arrayed Imperial host, with Karn Kagara at the head of his SOMs. The delegation stop as a black ship emerges from the darkness of space, and a Seielson ship lands in the bay. Dozens of armored Seielson descend, parting for a single herald. Yukajim. You stand before the lord of the 17th branching, who is Eta, prince and chieftain of the Otiolo, who is Voodoohome, the self-made, he who fashioned our world, who brought forth life from dead stone, he who brought us out of the chains of Utaiharo, who sees the watchers, who knows the mind of the makers, who leads us through the emptiness and the light. You stand before the Great One, our Master, our Lord, our Keeper, who is Father and Mother to us all, Utsabim Aronata Otiolo. The Seielson then fall to the ground, and Prince Aronata appears. It is not the Seielson of Hadrian's terrible vision, but nonetheless cuts a terrifying figure to behold. Aronata also brings forth a chained, gaunt woman covered in scars to serve as his own translator. Hadrian sees no spark of life in her eyes as Rain Smythe addresses Aronata, translated by Torvaro. The tense talks begin, with Aronata confronting its slave Tanaran. However, Hadrian quickly realizes that the talks of peace may be doomed, for the Seielson have no cultural concept of peace, instead equating it to surrender. Additionally, their Eta are seen as lords above all others, and consequently can never be seen as equals to another party in negotiations. Their authority is absolute, and cannot be refused or questioned in any manner. A younger Seielson then speaks up, and is revealed to be Aronata's child called Nobuta. The first round of talks makes little progress, with Aronata stating its people must still be fed and they will not resort to a life of trade with the humans. The predatory nature of the Seielson makes it nearly impossible to find an amicable settlement. Hadrian confides with Valka, telling her of his prophetic visions of war and fire. She comforts him, and they kiss. As negotiations continue, however, Aronata continues to be disgusted at the proposition of servicing one another. Hadrian notes that in the Seielson language, the term seems to somehow have sexual overtones. He is still deeply disturbed at the human slave kept by Aronata, and in one exchange she even whispers to Hadrian, begging to be killed. The slave is yanked back by Nobuta, but Hadrian pulls the chain and causes it to stumble. He stands tall and refuses to apologize to Aronata. Visiting Smythe later, the Tribune suggests appointing an apostle to the Seielson equivalent of their court. By now, however, Hadrian is more jaded and hesitant to accept the offer. Nonetheless, Smythe tells him a great many imperial powers are now vested in this affair, including the emperor himself. Consequently, Hadrian may have no choice but to accept. The following day, the proposition of an imperial emissary is put before Prince Aronata. It laughs as Nobuta speaks up with a surprising petulance. Hadrian notes that during the exchange, Aronata seems to refer to Nobuta as its fruit or body, implying it was carried within the body of the prince. Aronata then turns and demands that as the gift, Hadrian himself be handed over. After some deliberation, it is agreed the Seielson will accept the imperial emissary. Later, he wanders in the great garden of the demiurge and encounters Ren and Suzuha. They tell him tales of the Mericani, and reveal that ancient machines had built massive weapons of terrifying potential, all of which were claimed and sequestered away by Karn Kagara. The terms of Hadrian's emissary post are discussed the next day. Aronata despises the idea of Hadrian negotiating with the other clans, proposing instead he fight for the prince to conquer the other Seielson. Still, the barrier of language and cultural meaning impedes the negotiations, but then red lights begin to flash across the ship. Everyone gazes up at the garden's skylight, and slowly the Imperials recognize that somehow, atomics and antimatter weapons have been deployed against the Seielson world ship. Smythe is dumbstruck as Kagara confronts her, for a full Imperial fleet has dropped out of space and destroyed all hopes of peace. Then, a shot rings out and Ren falls stunned, but Sander Lin steps forward, revealing he had called the fleet behind Smythe's back. He switches off stun mode and fires again and again, and somehow, inexplicably, Karn Kagara takes 2 shots and crumbles to the floor. Silence reigns as the stunned Seielson and humans come to terms with the death of the ruler of Vargasos. Ren and Suzuha seem to seize up, and Lin reveals First Strategos Hauptmann has arrived with his fleet. Aronata, in anguish from the destruction of its world, howls and grabs Hadrian. Lin fires a stun bolt and both fall to the ground. Aronata is not fully out though, and casts on Nahute, the toothed steel snake-like drones of the Seielson at Lyn. More Seielson warriors begin to charge up the hill, and Aronata lunges at Hadrien. Hadrien cleaves the prince's sword in half, but like many times before, cannot bring himself to kill his foe. The lights go out on the demiurge, and chaos erupts. Remembering the words of Brethren, Hadrien calls out for the Imperial soldiers to find Ren and Suzuha. As fighting rages around him, Hadrien kills the Seielson herald with ease and then finds Nobuta. He convinces it to stay with him, promising protection. Sir William Crossflane's voice rings out, ordering everyone to fall back to the gate. Kagara's SOMs stand motionless, useless without the will of their master behind them. Smythe manages to reach the group as hundreds of deadly Nahute are launched at the retreating legionnaires. They flee through the garden gate, with a single line of hoplites standing behind to face the Seielson horde. The brave soldiers' sacrifices give everyone time to retreat to the Shiovona, with Ren, Suzuha, and Nobuta being carried along. However, at the end of a hall, the front of the group encounters a closed bulkhead. They are forced to be herded into a side door, their only avenue of escape that will unfortunately take them deeper into the demiurge. Basander and Hadrien try to lead them blindly through the maze of corridors, but then the Seielson ambush them from the walls, phantoms of ghosts appearing suddenly in the gloom. They are forced to double back, and the fighting retreat takes them into a massive hold where Hadrien briefly glances up. Black shapes hung in blackness, horrors without name. I beheld them only for an instant, but I knew them at once, knew that I stood upon the lowest level of the terrible armory, fortress, furnace, font of Karn's power, the Marikani weapons. Hadrien is able to count 72 deadly machines hanging above the fighting, some rivaling the size of mountains. His attention whips back to the fight for survival, and they continue on to the Imperial ship, and Smythe makes it back to the main group after covering their rear. They are able to flee to the Shiovona, where the prisoners are rushed inside and the shields begin to be raised. A small force is ordered to hold the hangar doors, but then a massive explosion throws them all back. Smythe staggers to her feet and orders Hadrien onto the ship. Another explosion then rocks the hangar. Hadrien, who had stumbled towards the ship, barely survives and is dragged on board by Valka. However, as he looks back, he cannot see Smythe or Sir William Crossflane. Despite making it back to relative safety, everyone on board now knows they are effectively trapped on the Shiovona. The shields will prevent the Seielson from breaking inside, but will only hold so long as the ship has fuel. However, Valka realizes the service umbilical is still attached to the ship, and offers a possible way of escape to the catwalks above. A small team may be able to escape and make contact with Red Company, still holed up in the Mistral. Hadrien realizes that if the ploy is successful, Smythe in her last actions will have trapped the Seielson between the two ships of humanity. A stoic Basander Lyn eyes downcast but steady, then volunteers to lead the mission as the surviving ranking officer. Volunteers are found, including Jinan, and the strike team steals away. The remaining survivors can do nothing but wait, but Hadrien then realizes they can use the PA system to communicate with the Seielson outside. He projects a hollow of himself outside the ship, and demands to speak with Aronata. The Eta of the Seielson asks to see Nobuta, and Hadrien counters by requesting to see their surviving human prisoners. Some 20 soldiers are lined up before Hadrien, and among them is a wounded William Crossflane and the charred body of Rain Smythe. However, Smythe is somehow alive, and feebly shouts out for him to not give in. The most dangerous sequence of negotiations thus far begins to play out, with Aronata seeking Nobuta to be returned, and Hadrien for the Seielson to disperse. Both parties, however, refuse to stand down. Prince Aronata then draws Smythe's high matter sword, and turns and kills one of the prisoners. Again, it demands Nobuta be returned. Hadrien refuses, and Aronata lifts up another soldier and coldly cuts him in half. William Crossflane rises, and asks to be killed so his men can be spared. Aronata seizes him and bites Crossflane in the throat. It tears away, facing Hadrien, and gruesomely swallows. Rage then consumes Hadrien, and he kicks Nobuta to its knees before him. One last time, he commands Aronata to retreat. The Seielson prince bared its teeth again. You wouldn't dare. I would dare all. Hadrien steels himself and recalls Smythe's last order to him, telling him to not give in. Resigning the commander to be dead, he executes Nobuta. Aronata releases its soldiers, who fall upon the prisoners and devour them alive. Hadrien kills the transmission and turns to the soldiers behind him. As it was for so many soldiers on so many battlefields, from that black ship back to the first sunrise over Uruk at the dawn of time. As it was for when Tashel spoke to Tamburlaine in that dead first Marlowe's words, those words we took for our own when we took the name. Our sword shall play the orators for us. The Seielson unleash their Nahute to drill into the Shiovona. Hadrien composes himself and realizes that for any chance of survival, they must attack. Though massively outnumbered, he orders for 200 men to be ready to fight. Valka proposes they release the coolant from the warp drive containment, creating a cold fog that will help in battle. Hadrien suits up and addresses the troops, inspiring them to fight against the 2-to-1 odds. I dare to smile and to hope. Hope is a cloud, that tiny voice within me said. The ramp is dropped, and Hadrien leads the charge outside. Through his suit's entropic projectors, it is initially a blinding white, but the faint red flames of the Seielson then appear. The coolant causes the water in the air to freeze, and several Seielson fall and choke to death. The legionnaires are attacked by the furious Seielson as the Nahute disengage from the ship and fall upon the soldiers. Hadrien fights through the chaos in the cold fog, nearly losing his sword. However, the Nahute are taking a grievous toll on his men, and they are forced to fall back to the ramp. Then, the door of the hold in the distance rumbles, and through it bursts Red Company. Basander Lin leads the charge with Jinan and Hadrian's friends. Hadrien, however, knows the fight is not over, for Prince Aronata has vanished. With the others, he chases the Seielson back to the Garden of the Demiurge, where there still lingers a view of the shattered Seielson world ship, Bahali Imnal Akura. Then, the Seielson ambush them, appearing from the trees on either side of the road Hadrien and his friends are on. Basander rallies the troops as Hadrien makes sure his companions are safe. Valka is able to begin disabling individual Nahute, as Hadrien realizes Aronata may be planning to destroy the Demiurge and everyone on board. He summons Polino, Krim, and Valka to his side, and races away to find the prince. They find Aronata on a rise, and it draws the High Matter sword stolen from Smythe. It attacks Hadrien and Valka as Krim and Polino battle the surrounding guard. Hadrien fights with a fury that clears his mind, inside knowing that the Seielson were betrayed, their world ship destroyed by the whims of humanity. However, Aronata is too strong and fast, and after a furious exchange grabs Hadrien's scalp. It hurls him against the wall, and as Hadrien clumsily lunges for a desperate attack, cuts off his right arm. Stunned, he slowly rises to his feet as Aronata picks up his sword. Aronata swings and decapitates Hadrien, ending the duel. So much blood. There was so much blood. Then there was nothing but darkness. Darkness and a profound, echoing quiet. Hadrien drifts, undoubtedly, in the realm of death, sensing he has become nothing while retaining a small piece of him, his name. Memories slowly come back to him, and he drifts towards a distant light. Then a shadow falls across him, and the Hadrien that is nothing looks up and sees himself, adorned in regal black and red armor, a renowned commander of Red Company. The other Hadrien simply points at a single star, seeming to indicate the way forward is his way back. The Hadrien that is nothing senses somehow he is indeed ready to return. Approaching the star, it turns out to be the white shell from Vargasos. Hadrien grabs it and light begins to flood into the darkness, and he falls. Hadrien somehow, inexplicably, returns to the world of the living. He finds his left arm, not his right, gone with the right fully restored and holding a Lauren's sword. His old friend Tor Gibson appears, and Hadrien realizes the apparition is one of the Quiet. It simply tells Hadrien, "We are not done with you." Bewildered, Hadrien is then told they simply wish him to exist. Elsewhere, the fight between Aronata and Red Company rages on. Valka is forced to watch as Aronata stomps on Hadrien's head, crushing it to a pulp. Basander also witnessed Hadrien's death, but true to his nature carries on the fight in the garden. Aronata falls on Valka, and despite Krim striking it with a throwing knife, knocks Valka down. but as Aronata raises its sword, Hadrien appears from behind and stabs it in the chest, then slicing up its torso before decapitating the prince. Hadrien collapses before an ashen Valka, grabbing one of Aronata's rings. Krim appears with Smy's sword, looking at his commander in awe and horror. Basander is also shocked. The officer's world rocked as he looks at a man he saw die. The SOMs begin to stir, which in turn means the demiurge and presumably Karn Kagara will return to the fray. Hadrien staggers to the scene of his death to find his body gone, his severed arm in a pool of water. It confirms to him that everything that happened was real, and he turns to see the SOMs tearing the Seielson apart. They are led by Suzuha, who is effectively one of the new Karn Kagaras. Hadrien passes out, drifting through indiscernible dreams. He wakes up in front of Ren and Suzuha, realizing now there are two Karns. In the aftermath of the battle, Aronata's Skianda has been entirely wiped out, though the fact remains that 20,000 people of the Empire were condemned to a gruesome death. The Karns tell Hadrien that as a form of gratitude, they have healed him while his fleet awaits his return. Hadrien looks down to find both his arms regrown, and learns his left arm bones have been replaced with an adamant lattice capable of blocking high matter. He is questioned of his death by the Karns, who are astounded to hear of the Quiet's powers and Hadrien's miraculous resurrection. Your Chantry teaches that man is the first and greatest of the powers in the universe, but the cosmos was old even when the Egyptians laid the cornerstones of their first pyramids. The deeps you found were left behind, I think, by some other power long gone. There are others, whole civilizations dead and broken, others that have not noticed we exist the way you might overlook an anthill, and still others, like your Quiet, that have taken an interest. It seems to Hadrien the Quiet are influencing their future somehow by using the fabric of time. The subject turns to death again, with the Karns disappointed that Hadrien truly did not control the events of his return. For in his unfathomably long life, Kagara has grown to have a deep fear of death, and the one question he cannot answer in all his years of knowledge is what happens after he dies. Hadrien dons the Ring of Aronata, and then is shuttled off the demiurge. He watches the massive ship behind him vanish into space, moving incomprehensibly fast without ever entering warp. Hadrien is taken to the ship Sieglinde, where he is introduced to First Strategos Hauptmann. In the vast cogs of the military machine of the Imperium, the entire affair with the Seielson has been, in Hauptmann's eyes, simply regarded as a successful mission. The Strategos seems to believe, perhaps rightly, that negotiation of any form with the Seielson is impossible, for he is centuries old and has served since the beginning of the war. Hauptmann has endured the loss of 998 systems and 60 billion lives in the Empire, a scale incomprehensible to the comparatively short time Hadrien has spent fighting. He learns that Basanderlin commended his actions in battle, almost to a point of reverence. Hadrien is also granted the Order of Merit, which makes him a Knight of the Empire. Then, stunningly, Hauptmann stands aside and a holograph is shown, bearing the Imperial Seal. His Imperial Radiance, the Emperor William the 23rd of the House Avent, firstborn son of the Earth, guardian of the solar system, King of Avalon, Lord Sovereign of the Kingdom of Windsor in exile, Prince Imperator of the Arms of Orion, of Sagittarius, of Perseus and Centaurus, Primarch of Orion, Conqueror of Norma, Grand Strategos of the Legions of the Sun, Supreme Lord of the Cities of Forum, North Star of the Constellations of the Blood Palatine, Defender of the Children of Men, and Servant of the Servants of Earth stood before me. Though simply a recording, Hadrien kneels as William addresses him by name and elevates him to the rank of knight. However, the offer is extended to induct him into the ranks of the Royal Victorian Knights, an unprecedented honor. Hadrien is summoned to travel to Forum immediately, where he will serve as a personal servant to the Emperor and his family. It is due to his great deeds in battle, for he is the first human to ever slay a Seielson war prince in combat. Hadrien will travel to Forum on the Shiovona, and is allowed to take Red Company with him there as well. Valka is stunned at the news, and is hesitant to go to Forum due to her neural lace, a sin in the eyes of the Chantry. Switch later approaches Hadrien, asking again for forgiveness, but Hadrien cannot forget the deaths of so many, which he deems to be on Switch's hands. For the final time, he dismisses one of his closest friends as the door seals behind him. Hidden from the world for a moment by two doors of solid steel, I slid to my knees and wept. For Switch, for our friendship. I wept for Smythe, for Crossflame, for Aronata, for Nobuta, and Tanaran. I wept for the soldiers we lost, for the futures that might have been. And for myself most of all. Hadrien meets with Valka and shows her the white shell from Vargasos. Walking on, he reunites with Basander Lin, who now looks upon him with almost a religious reverence. Hadrien strides to a catwalk, where below many of the crew and soldiers are milling about. Upon seeing him, they call out "Miracle," and in that moment, Hadrien knows he has lost control of his story, his legend. Basander seems to be utterly different, now openly wondering if Hadrien will truly be the man who can end the war. And from below, shouts begin to ring out, celebrating the return of Red Company's hero. Half mortal, half mortal.